I'm going to kick it over to Natali to do introductions and to start the show. Natali.
So I'm Natali Villarruel, she, her. I'm an A Sweat Life ambassador, so super excited to also get to be a part of this and moderate a panel. A little bit background on me. I am a triathlete, member of Team USA, all around random, reluctant athlete that was taught that running was punishment and trying to, find a balance of that in my life. So the panelists I've chosen are people that I know and have met and been inspired by through triathlon. So super excited to have some of my friends here. Ooh, that just switched. Okay. Sorry, go back to gallery view. It's weird to not see any faces. So I'm going to let them each kind of speak a little bit about themselves and about their experience with triathlon as a nice little intro. So we'll go ahead and kick it off with Khadija.
Hello, my name is Khadija Diggs. I am also a member of Team USA, and that's how I met Natali. I did my first triathlon as part of an initiative for my sorority, Gamma Gamma Chi Sorority Incorporated. And I love to race. It's become my passion. It's become how I express myself as a Muslim woman and a mom. And I'm excited to be here tonight. Thank you so much for having me, Natali.
Hello, I am Aaron Hamilton. Pronouns are she and her. I got into triathlon because I had an accident about 5 years ago that wouldn't allow me to continue my professional amateur career in cycling, and it gave me the drive and mission to finish through my recovery and also become an example to the trans community that we can race as well. So I've been doing that for about 3 years.
Awesome. And then John, do you want to close this out with the intros?
Sure. My name's John Young. He, his, him. Live up in Boston, Massachusetts, originally from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. The age of, early 40s, I was extremely not a really fit person, was diagnosed with severe sleep apnea. Luckily, kind of was prescribed a CPAP machine, started to sleep properly, got back into swimming, which I'd always done. And then somebody sent me a video of Rick and Dick Hoyt doing an Ironman. And so in early 2009, I thought, hey, maybe that's something I could get interested in. And so I trained and did my first sprint triathlon, had never even run around a track at the age of 43 years old. And that got me hooked. And I've been racing ever since and kind of moved up in distances, kind of the regular progression, Olympic distance, half Ironman. And then in 2016, I raced in Ironman, Maryland, to become the first person with dwarfism to compete in an Ironman. And I've run the Boston and New York marathons a few times, and it's kind of changed my life. And I don't see myself slowing down anytime soon, I hope.
That's awesome. Which, speaking of, if Gina, you can play the video. John was featured on CNN, so we're going to play part of the video. And I can put in Slack later the link to the full video. But if we could play that as a good little kind of setting the scene for the talk.
The moment I wake up, part of me wishes that I could roll over and go back to sleep. But I've learned that to achieve the goals you want, you have to put in the work. This race is probably the biggest thing that I've ever prepared for. All my other racing has kind of been in preparation for this.
John Young is training for his first Ironman triathlon.
Being a little person, we grow up a lot with people telling us, you can't do that, you're too small. You can't do that, you're too short. I want to show that any other person who's short-statured, if they want to do something bad enough, they can prepare and do it. The Ironman is a 2.4-mile open water swim, a 112-mile bike ride, followed by a full marathon, 26.2 miles of running. No one with dwarfism has ever done a full Ironman, so I will be the first.
It's been wonderful to watch him just kind of keep going and keep moving. I had no idea we would be in this place. I just wanted him to start being healthier.
When I started teaching full-time, I kind of had gone away from being physically active. In 2006, I went to the doctor and I was diagnosed with severe sleep apnea. When he asked me to step on the scale at 4'4", it said I weighed 195 pounds. It was kind of a bit of a shock.
John slowly started getting in shape. In 2009, he did his first sprint triathlon. He was hooked. Soon he began training for longer and longer distances. And in 2015, he finished the Boston Marathon.
It's been a big motivation for me. When I was younger, I was a bit concerned about why am I always last and all that stuff. And then when he decided to do his first aqua bike, it kind of showed me that even dwarves can do many things that average-sized people can.
My motto, my catchphrase, my hashtag is be the hammer. When I did the Boston 2014 marathon and I wasn't able to finish due to illness, I was upset. And Owen said to me, "Dad, sometimes you're the hammer and sometimes you're the nail." So that day I was the nail. Now it's my chance to be the hammer.
I'm amazed at everything he's done, what he represents for our community. I'm beyond proud.
I think crossing that finish line is obviously going to be probably, besides the birth of my son, it's probably just going to be all those people that ever said, "You can't do this," just going away.
Nice time too. Wow. All right.
Whatever body you have, male, female, skinny, tall, you shouldn't be judged by that outward shell. And I think that's the message I hope that people take away.
I'm really proud of what I did. I'm the first person with dwarfism to do a race, and I'm 50 years old. It was amazing, very special time. I'm feeling pretty good.
All right. That also kind of helped explain to give for anybody who's not familiar with triathlon, also what an Ironman distance race is, because all of these folks, minus myself, because I have not built up to that yet, are Ironman triathletes. So it's super amazing. They're all like superheroes to me. So kind of also want to go around to each one and talk about where you draw inspiration from and what really pushed you to not just get into triathlon, but to go long distance, because that's like a whole other beast all into itself to take on 140.6. So we'll start with you, Khadijah.
Oh, wow. I started racing long and I talk about this a lot, and even every time I talk about it, it's still hard. My niece, a good friend of mine, we had been friends so long, his daughter was my niece. She died of brain cancer. And I had just started doing triathlon. She lived with me for a while she went back and forth between my ex-husband's house. Her parents had moved back to Gambia. She flew back to the United States for treatment. And I always say this, that endurance athletes are sometimes, almost all of us are running from something or running to something. My training became my therapy. And then less than a year later, I lost my father-in-law to pancreatic cancer. So that's what kind of took me into going longer. And also one of the things that drove me to doing a full Ironman, well, I had already signed up for it, but one of the things that made me determined to finish and finish with a good time was, I guess about 2 weeks before I did my first Ironman, I made my first attempt at making the US team, and I passed out. So that was those are the two things, one that made me push so hard on my first one, but just to get me there and start doing more endurance sports, it was therapy. It was my way of being in motion and not thinking and not having to feel for that period of time when I was on the bike, or especially when I was swimming. I love to swim, and just that rush of the water and only being able to hear my breath and my heartbeat. There was something about it that was completely therapeutic. So.
And I know, in terms of for Aaron, we've kind of talked about this before with, because Khadijah mentioned therapy, and for you is kind of therapy in a different way, recovering from an injury. And that's something that happens, pretty often in the sport, especially, with cycling being a major component, that there's always that risk of injury, whether it's a negligent driver or something else, So do you kind of want to talk about your journey with having a brain injury and kind of recovering and then building up to an Ironman?
Yeah, sure. So how I got, now that I'm calm, my nerves have calmed down. How I got into triathlon is kind of unique. I almost had kind of the ability of having to do physical activity taken away from me completely, getting hit head on by an SUV while training on my bike for a cycling race, stage race. So I suffered from a devastating traumatic brain injury. So because of that injury, I wasn't able to continue my cycling career because the risk was too high of sustaining another blow to the head. And my doctors were telling me that if I sustain another significant head injury, that I most likely won't wake up again. So, that dream of becoming like a professional cyclist was taken away. And it took a lot of fighting to get to the point where I can even do anything, and convincing my doctors that triathlon was reduced risk compared to cycling because of the rules and everything with regards to the bike and not being able to group up in a peloton. So triathlon and my first Ironman, Coeur d'Alene, in 2017 was kind of my beacon through my rehab and recovery from that accident. And it was kind of the carrot on my stick because, all of my doctors told me that this isn't something that you would be able to do because of my brain injury, and that I should aim lower for my goals. And with respect to that, and I understand that, doctors are always more cautious than, gung ho, but I finally got them to come around that this is something that I needed. So that was kind of like the driving force of going from not being able to, walk, talk, or do anything to 2 years later completing my first full Ironman to kind of prove everybody wrong. On top of, when I started training for that Ironman, coming out as a trans woman and starting my transition at the same time. So, I live my life as, swing for the fences. So might as well do everything at the same time. So, yeah. So that was kind of my carrot on the stick to get me standing and walking and doing what I needed to do again.
That's awesome. I know John definitely knows about people telling him that there are things he can't do and silencing those folks. So if John, you kind of want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, Aaron touched on doctors, and that I think was the big thing for me is before I got into triathlon, when Owen, our son, was much younger, he's a pretty active kid. And I remember going to Little People of America conventions and having doctors say, physical activity is really important, but avoid running. Running's not good for the back. It's not good for the lower spine because of some of the physical conditions we have with our dwarfism. There's some real concerns about lower spine issues. And so when I kind of got into triathlon and I found out that the running actually, it actually relieved some of the pain and discomfort I was having, I kind of went back to the doctors and I said, but this is actually helping me. And they're like, oh, well, that's just, it's just a fluke that it's working like that with you. I really would recommend that you don't tell other little people to run. And, when I started getting onto social media, other people with dwarfism were kind of, they're starting to do 5Ks and these color runs and all sorts of other activities, and all, and much younger than I am. Like I said, I'm 55 now. And so I started this in my late 40s. And so for me, it was much more just to kind of silence those doctors who were kind of speaking from an area of not really a lot of understanding and just kind of guessing, I think, a lot of the times. And but I have to also swing it the other way and say my own mother was telling me I was crazy for considering this because she thought I would get hurt. And so it's the full gamut from people that really care about me kind of telling me to slow down and stop, to people that were total strangers. And so, you know, when I first got into it, it was all for me. It really was. It was just, I want to get healthy. I want to feel better. I want to lose some weight, and I'm enjoying this. And I'm finding the community of triathletes to be amazing people. And so I kind of stuck to it. And so the other part of it about showing other people that, you know, you can do anything is, in my mind, is just kind of the bonus to kind of what I've been doing.
Absolutely. And speaking of kind of showing people, the other side of that is also representation and kind of like what it means for you guys. Because I know for me, a big part of like me making it to Team USA was that I volunteered at the World Championship when it was here in Chicago. And I was checking in all the international athletes that spoke Spanish. And I was like, these are like regular everyday people. I could be on Team USA. I could do that. I could train and I could make that happen. But it wasn't until I saw it and was, you know, surrounded by that and realized like, oh, there's people with brown skin that speak Spanish and here they are competing, you know, in the international arena. So I know that for me was like a big eye-opening experience. So kind of for you guys, and we'll start with Khadija, but just kind of like what representation means for you and how it's important and kind of like what that looks like in terms of practice and whether it's everyday life or racing. You know, like does it involve more diversity in coaches, better training for race directors, access to resources? Just like how do we kind of, you know, build that representation, but in a way that is equitable and not just like doing it as like what we call inspiration porn, where they're like, well, if this person does it, you don't have any excuses, you can do it too, which isn't really moving the needle forward. So Khadija, I know that was kind of like a 3-part question if you want to.
That was like a bajillion-part question. But yeah, and you know, it's funny as John talks about, you know, people telling him you can't do something because of this for different reasons. His story is my story. People would tell me, oh, you're never going to be able to race fast with all those clothes on. I remember after completing my first 70.3 and saying out loud, you know what? I think I'm fast enough to make the US team at the long course distance. And somebody laughed. They laughed at me. And, you know, it hurt, but it also inspired me. And when you talk about representation and you're checking people in and they speak Spanish and, you know, you see brown people, I think it is important. Until I raced in Dubai, I had never raced with another Muslim woman. So for me to see another Muslim woman racing meant everything. I got an instant message yesterday, and it was a drawing from a little girl, and I didn't know what it was. And I just said, thank you. And then about an hour later, her mother belongs to this group softball team. Her mother posted the picture. Her daughter had done her Black History, a little Muslim girl in Canada, had done her Black History project on me. She had never seen another Muslim triathlete. And it was a picture of me on her bike. Representation is everything. Sometimes you have to see somebody who looks like you doing something to say, you know what? Yes, I can. Yes, I can. And it's funny because I laughed with Natali about this. I'm Black, I'm Muslim, and I'm Hispanic. So I have all these people telling me no for all of these different reasons. But sometimes we have to turn around and just tell ourselves yes. Your story tears me up, John, because it's funny. It's just, and then the fact I'm a mother of 10. I have 3 adopted children, 7 biological children, and the fact that your son is inspired by you, that's got to be the biggest thing ever. That's got to mean everything.
And I think the best thing about that is that I've never told him or asked him to run. And now he's on the cross country team. Yes. And he's a little person. And I never had anyone like that when I was a kid. I never had someone like me. And now, like I said, Owen will get out there and he plays ultimate Frisbee. He does cross country. And that to me is, I get all my joy just from watching him.
Yeah. And there'll be other kids behind him simply because they saw him. He saw you, and it's exponential. It's absolutely exponential. And it's very important for us to see ourselves. And you're one of the people who saw yourself, who saw it before it existed. You need people like that to, I always name my years of racing. One of the years was to see the unseen, to set up goals for myself that on paper I couldn't achieve. And some of those things are that we have to do that. We have to see what never existed for ourselves so that others can. Yeah. Yeah, and when you speak about race directors, that's very important as well. I know, and you were there with me at Ohio.
Yeah.
I often have issues. I've had people physically grab me and try to pull me off of race courses because of my kits, even after they were fully ITU and USAT approved. At Ironman Ohio, the race director walked up to me, "Are you number 143?" "Yes, I am." He said, "Welcome to the race." And Natalie and I both kind of looked at each other like, wow, that was the first time that ever happened. And it was a great experience. I think people just being aware of, and I hate to use this word, but for lack of a better word, what the normal athletes are. I race like everyone else. My kit is not giving me any advantage over anyone else. A trans athlete who says they're a woman, they're a woman. There shouldn't be any, director shouldn't have any issues with that. It is what it is.
Yeah, if I can add to that, it is quite shocking that race directors, as well as the volunteers at races, and it should be the responsibility of the race director and the organizers of events to have a better knowledge with regards to gender identity and to never assume one's gender, because I run into it so much where, you just approach the registrar, for example, for me, I just approach the registration table and they just assume that I'm a male. Doesn't matter like how big my boobs are or how long my hair is, or if I'm wearing makeup or anything like that. They just assume that I'm male. And, they're not doing it out of hate or anything like that. They just don't know. A lot of people don't know what being trans is or what it's all about. So it's like, there's definitely education can be done better, and not just assuming that, the number of times that I've been marked with an M on my cap or on my calf is, I can't even count. So, like, especially during this age, people should recognize the fact that it's not just male, female. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done there.
John, do you have anything else you want to touch on for representation and kind of what that looks like or means for you?
I want to talk a little bit of, Khadija was mentioning about race directors. I've had most of the time, like really great experience with race directors, even at races that I've appeared at the first time. But I do remember once at a smaller triathlon, there's a rule that when your bike is on the rack, one of the wheels has to touch the ground. Well, that's impossible for my bike when it's on the rack because of the size of the bike. And I remember I put it on the rack and I came around and one of the referees who was there was questioning my bike and was like concerned about the fact that it wasn't following the rules. And the race director just took them aside and they were like, seriously, are you really going to question this person? And everything was forgotten, but it's the only time that I actually ever remember getting any kind of a hassle, even, bordering on a hassle. But I think for me, in terms of representation, I remember I'm getting kind of choked up about it now because it always kind of comes back to me in the same way. When I was doing Ironman Maryland, it was in 2016, the swim was canceled due to bad weather. And we did the bike, the part of the bike course was flooded. The run course all got flooded. And so, it was an amazing day, but all sorts of weird things were thrown our way. But I remember when I was about a mile from the finish, it was dark, it was nighttime, about 10:15 in the evening. There weren't a lot of racers left on the course, but there were a number of us. my coach was there, and he had seen me at 3 or 4 different spots during the race. And he stopped me with about a mile to go, and we were just chatting for a second. And he said, whatever happens, John, you'll only ever going to have one first Ironman. So whatever this finish line is to you, it has to be, this is it. You'll never have another first one. And so I remember I kept on running, and all I kept screaming at the top of my lungs for about a minute to 2 or 3 minutes was, watch me now. Watch me now. And I was basically yelling at every person in my life who's ever said, you're too short to do that. You can't do that. You might get hurt. Be careful. You're not tall enough. And I was literally screaming it. And I remembered feeling like, that's it. Like, that's the reason why, I guess, one of the reasons I was put here was to kind of, show people that, like I said in the video, tall, short, fat, thin, old, young, male, female, whatever. If you want to do it bad enough, you can do it. And the fact that I went back in 2017 and raced again, did the swim, did the bike, got to mile 16 of the run and had to stop just because mentally I wasn't ready to finish those last 10 miles. I don't care. I was there and I did it. And, whatever I do from now on, you can't take that away from me. And I think that's the same for all of us. You can't take that away.
Absolutely.
Well, they're trying to take it away from us. They're being very successful.
To kind of stick with you, John, if we can kind of segue a little bit and talk about community and kind of like, how do you find a community, or how do you build that support to get you where you need to go, especially for somebody like you who was the first, kind of what was that journey like in, finding people who could help you get to the finish line?
You look at an Ironman, and the bike, I think, is probably the most crucial part. Is there aren't bicycles made for me. And so when I first started racing, I basically took a child's mountain bike, a girl's mountain bike, an aluminum frame, very heavy, had it adapted and raced with that. But then, in about 2014, 2015, I sent a tweet to 7 different bike manufacturers, and it was a public tweet, and I tagged 7 different manufacturers, and I said, do you want to help me become the first little person to do an Ironman? And only one bike manufacturer responded to me, and that was 7 Cycles located here in Massachusetts. And they said, let's talk. And so they designed a frame for me, a carbon fiber and titanium frame. And it was going to cost, a good chunk of money. And I was prepared to do some fundraising. And then, when I kind of posted online that the bike was being made and things were in the works and how exciting this was, I got a private message from a lady who reached out to me who I'd never met before. And she was talking to me about it and how excited she was. And she said, oh, I have a niece who has dwarfism and she's married and has some children. I know some of the things that you've had to go through in your life. And she said, how are you going to pay for your bike? And I said, well, we were going to do some fundraising. And she just said, well, the fundraising is done. My husband and I are paying for your bike. And so they just paid. They basically just said, whatever it costs, let us know. And I remember saying to her, I can't accept this gift. Like, my mother would never let me do this. This is too much. I can't. And she said to me, I have to be very honest with you, John. She said, the bike is not for you. The bike is for every person with dwarfism that sees you do what you're going to do. They need to see it. That bike is for them. You just use it. And I said, okay. And so, that was a really important part of the journey. Getting a custom made wetsuit was another thing, so Blue 70 reached out and said, we'd like to make you a wetsuit, and they helped design a wetsuit for me. So all of these things, it's important. And like I said, a lot of it is just not asking and just hoping that people are going to hear. But sometimes you do have to ask, and it's, sometimes they say no, and sometimes they say no, but I'll help, and we'll figure it out as we go. But those two people were kind of crucial in helping me in my journey.
Mike, trying to hold it together during all these stories, even though I know these stories, I still it's really powerful to kind of have everybody talking together. And Khadija, like you right now, doing amazing things with DISC and, you know, building your own community of athletes. So if you can kind of touch on like what, you know, your approach of building your own community so that, you know, you can pay for those kind of coming behind you. So if you can kind of tell folks about that project.
Yeah. One of the things, what John is saying is so true. I belong to an organization called the Black Triathletes Association, BTA. But even within BTA, there weren't other Muslim women, maybe one or two other Muslim women. And so within that community, it was still, I was kind of on the outer edges. But I do remember when I qualified for 70.3 World Championships in South Africa, I wasn't going to go because I couldn't afford it. And they paid for my airline ticket to go. So I understand how that feels to have somebody want something so much for you. I've had so many opportunities that I've been able to, that I've been offered. People have helped me for absolutely no reason at all. My mentor, Coach Alanga Thandaway, I remember I was training for Ironman in Arizona, and he would come out to the lake every weekend with his kayak. Everybody else had finished their races for the year. He came out solely to support me. So I completely understand. So DISC is a program, it's called the Diversity Infusion Syndicate. And of course, diversity is very popular right now. And so people are posting pictures and, you know, having campaigns, but I wanted to do something that was active and tangible. So what I decided to do was to take all of the things that I learned over the years, all of the products and sponsors that I'd worked with over the years, all the coaches who had helped me for absolutely no reason, I pulled them together and said, hey, look, and I also went out and got my USAT coaching certification. So all this was in preparation for this. I said, I want to coach 3 Muslim women if I can find them, and make them triathletes. And they kind of looked at me like, Khadija, okay, we know you're crazy, you do this kind of stuff. So in December, I put out an application process. I said, I'm looking for Muslim women and women of color. If you want to be coached by a world-class team, have an opportunity to receive all the products that I receive from my sponsors, and you're willing to put in some work, because they're not paying for the coaching, but I have put in the caveat that we are doing community service projects over the course of the year. And I call them the class of 2021. And just like when you graduate from high school or college, you come back and you have that reunion and you help the classes behind you. That's, I clearly stated that's what I expect of these young ladies. So we were going to do 3. I was absolutely thrilled at the applicant pool that we received. And we actually selected 4 women. There's only one young lady who's a Muslim. The other 3 of them are African-American women, but they're all hugely diverse. And that's one of the things we talked about. And Natali, they're all African-American women, but they're all very different. One is Muslim, one was born in Jamaica, she is the parents of Nigerian immigrants. And one young lady, she was just, she was born and raised right here in the United States. And we laughed about it as I talked about myself. I mean, my father is Cuban, my mother's from North Carolina. I'm Muslim, I was married to a guy from Gambia. We're not monolithic in who we are. And I think it's important to recognize that. And 2, I think it's important to, if we want to see diversity, we have to be active change agents in creating that diversity and do it within the sphere of our influence. I'm not a rich woman. This is what I have to offer. I had myself to offer. So I engaged other people and I said, I'm offering my skills and the associations that I have, and I'm going to teach these women. Will you help me? And they joined in, and I'm excited. I'm excited about it. They had their first yoga session with the yoga instructor who's going to help them through this journey, Christy Fenner, today. So I was doing a little bit of yoga before I came in today, and I'll be sharing their journey and hopefully it'll grow exponentially. Hopefully all of them if not just one of them, will do the same thing for somebody else. So
Yeah,
I talked a lot. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. That's that each one teach one. When you're the first, then you got to keep bringing everybody else behind. So
if you're the first and you're the last, you've done nothing.
Yeah. So we're gonna kind of switch gears a little bit because this is something that, like, personally really has been an interesting experience, and that's kind of when it comes to different barriers to sport. Because I know, like, one of the things we always talk about is gear, like, for instance, and Khadijah and I kind of gone through this with Team USA kits, that, like, the largest size it went up to was a 2X. And so, like, when I tried my kit on, I was afraid if I farted, I would bust a seam. Like, it was so tight to my body. And I was like, how is 2X the largest size that you have? Like, there are larger athletes than a 2X. And I know Khadijah had to have a custom, kit made to follow her guidelines. And it's so, even when it comes to everyday apparel, cycling shorts, for instance, are based on men's anatomy. So it's like they turned them pink and they're like, cool, now women can use them. And we were like, but hey, not really. Like, so there's a lot of different things that, whether it's gear or training or different things like that, there can be a lot of barriers to sport. So I was hoping, Erin, if you can kind of touch on, like, some of the experiences you had. I know, like, because I read your blog, so, like, definitely kind of your experience with, like, going to the gym and the locker rooms and things like that. So just kind of like things that have been a barrier for, sport in general or triathlon for you.
Yeah. It's been, God, it feels like it's just been barrier after barrier after barrier after barrier. And it's a lot harder, the earlier you are in transition, obviously, the further you are in transition, it does get a little bit easier. But, I've had a lot of barriers, specifically with, like, locker rooms. That's been probably the biggest. I've been yelled at in locker rooms. I've been followed out of, these are all female locker rooms. I've been pointed out, yelled at in the women's locker room. I've been followed out of the women's locker room and confronted in the parking lot for being in there. I've been kicked out by a handful of locker rooms because I was making people uncomfortable. And to give a little background specifically with locker rooms, because that's always that's the touchiest subject. I'm probably the most respectful person in the locker room, probably more so than the cis women that are in there. When I go into the locker room, I'm not just going to go in there and pull my pants down and tell everybody to deal with it. No, that's not the type of person that I am. I try to respect everybody's feelings and comfort level. So for the first 2 years, whenever I was in that locker room, I would take all of my stuff into the cramped, very small, very cramped, personal stalls and get dressed, either undress or get dressed, do what I need to do in the privacy of that tiny little space. And the only time that I would be out in the general areas, either putting stuff in the locker room or in the lockers or kind of relaxing. So, I'm not whipping everything out. But even being as respectful as I could in the locker rooms, it always seems like that's never enough. And it doesn't matter how many surgeries you have, it doesn't get better and it doesn't get easier. With regards to, like, racing and stuff like that, well, if anybody who's followed me on social media or, with Live Feisty or places like that, you're aware of my stance and with Ironman as an entity and organization with how they treat trans athletes. I haven't been quiet about my disapproval with them at all. They probably, out of all of the sporting regulations, they probably have the biggest and worst barriers for trans athletes to overcome and get through. every race, pretty much every race that I went into the first 2 years, I had the potential of being disqualified because they wanted me to disclose to them that I was a trans woman. And keep in mind that this was only a requirement for trans women. It wasn't a requirement for trans men or non-binary people. But, if specifically with Ironman, if you didn't disclose that you were a trans woman, they will disqualify you on spot. And of course, being the stubborn person that I am, I refuse to tell them or to let them know and go through their terrible process to be quote unquote approved to race in an Ironman. I just said, screw you. I'm not going to tell you anything because I'm an age grouper. I'm not going after money. I'm not going after podiums. I'm literally just there to finish the race. You don't need to have my entire medical history. You don't need my mental health records. Sorry, I'm not going to give them to you. If you want to disqualify me, disqualify me. I don't, I'll still finish the race. It's not like you can try to pull me off, but I'm not going to. So, even local races, that fear of being disqualified, hung over my head every time because these are the rules that we, unfortunately, even age groupers have to follow. Pro athletes, I agree to an extent of what we need to, what's required of trans women to do. But I'm not a pro athlete. I'm an age grouper. I race to finish, not race to win. And it's ridiculous. So, it's really unfortunate that we're always kind of targeted in these, and that, people are going to extreme efforts to not allow us to race or compete or to do freaking anything in this country. But I know we'll be going more into depth on that specific question later on. But yeah, it's my brain injury. My memory is already forgotten what the actual question was. So I apologize.
No, that was great. And
my memory goes very quickly.
Khadijah or John, if either of you have anything to kind of add to that in terms of, experiences with barriers to sport or, anything that you guys have kind of encountered.
Nothing. I think the one thing that I remember happening a few times is I would show up to a race and I have a handicap accessible parking placard. And so I'll get to a race, and unfortunately you go to a lot of the smaller races and all of the porta potties are in the parking lot where the handicap parking spaces are. They dump them right where the handicap spots are. And so I'll say, excuse me, is there a handicap parking area? And they're like, are you racing? And I said, yep. And they said, well, why do you need a handicap spot if you're racing? And I said, well, first thing is, would you say the same thing to a wheelchair athlete? Probably not. So I have a handicap parking placard because I'm allowed to have one. And I've had this discussion with people going to the gym. I'll go to the YMCA for a swim and I'll park in a handicap spot and I'll be walking into the gym and someone will say, are you going into exercise? Yes. Why did you park in the handicap spot? And I said, that spot's for people that are accessible. It doesn't mean you're lazy or not lazy. It has nothing to do with my physical fitness. It has to do with the fact that I'm allowed that placard by law because of a lot of reasons, not just because of how far I can walk, and people don't think of the fact that, well, maybe those spots are closer to the building, so I don't have to walk by a whole bunch of cars that might run me over because they can't see me as they're backing up. Like, people don't think. And another part of me says, I don't want to explain it to you because it's none of your business. So just, get out of my face. But that's probably the one thing about handicap parking that I kind of, is the only kind of real hassle that I've had. I already talked a little bit about my bike. Clothing is a big issue for me, but that's been like that for all of my clothing, not just my race clothing. So I have to get some things adapted. Some things I can kind of, even cycling shorts, for example, I have to alter them because if I wear regular cycling shorts, they're usually past my knees, and that's just not practical. Cycling singlet's easy because there's no sleeves on it, but a lot of stuff, like I said, has to be adapted here or there. But, I wear women's running shoes, women's sized running shoes. I tried running in boys' shoes. I have a size 5, which is about a women's 6.5 or 7. But boys' running shoes fall apart. They're not made to last, and they're made to fall apart. So you have to buy them another pair. So I found I run in New Balance running shoes. They make a lot of wide sizes, and I have wide feet, and so I've really had a lot of good luck with New Balance. But that's kind of, that's about it. But like I said, a lot of it is just me not wanting to bother explaining it to a lot of people because they just want to know the stuff.
Yeah. It sounds like Ironman doesn't like to be nice to a lot of people. The 3 races where I was physically almost tried to be pulled off the line were all Ironman races.
Yeah.
One of the things that that made me feel good though, the first time I was actually challenged at a race and officials physically tried to pull me off the line, the gentleman who was the announcer at that particular race, I saw him several years later at Ironman Florida, and he said to me, he called me by name, which I thought was strange. He called me by my legal name. He didn't call me Khadija, so he knew who I was from my race records. And I looked at him, I said, "You mean Khadija?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "I remember you from Ironman Raleigh." And he said, "I was the race official who called you out at the athletes briefing." I said, "I know." As I looked at him, I was like, "I know." And he said, "I've been following your story." And he said, "I apologize." And I see him every now. He's actually the announcer at Miami. He was the announcer at Miami Man this past year and the year before. Yeah. And I every time I see him, I consider him to be, a friend now, because it takes a huge person to apologize. But Ironman does have some issues that I think that they refuse to address. Even with now having ITU and USAT approved kits, I shouldn't have to ask for permission every time I race. They know my kits are ITU and USAT approved. I shouldn't have to. I was happy about what happened at Ironman Ohio, but that shouldn't be how it happens. I want to show up to race just like everyone else.
Yeah, just to kind of add to that, Ironman's not all bad. It's
no, they have some issues.
The corporation and the policymakers are the ones that are bad and need to be educated. So like one of the biggest fears that I had going into my first Ironman in Coeur d'Alene, I was 2 years into transition at that time, was the transition tents, because they separate the tents by gender. They have male tents and they have female tents. Local races, at least in my region, it was your transition tent was where your bike was in the transition, and that's where you had to do everything that you needed to do. So, that was the biggest fear that I had because of the risk of getting disqualified because I didn't disclose that I was a trans woman, was the tents. But that's what's great about like the volunteers that are at Ironman. They don't know anything about the BS that, the policymakers or the rules. They're just there to point you into the direction and give you what you need to go. So when I got out of the water and, they told me to lay down and to rip off my wetsuit, and I was like, oh my, they didn't even bat an eye. They're just like, the female tent is to the left. They didn't say, oh, the male tent's over there, go over in that direction. They took my wetsuit off, and also this was before I had bottom surgery. So it's like, you can't really hide what's down there in a cycling kit or a tri kit, but they're just like, female tent that way, go for it, and got into the tent, had no issues. Nobody cared. Granted, everybody was exhausted and probably was just like, I'm dying. But
I
nobody
can tell
cared.
you, as just a woman who was born a woman, my first Ironman, I walked into the tent and everybody was half dressed. I was completely horrified. I was just
Yep.
like, oh my God, everybody's naked.
Yeah, I mean,
So I
I
just
walked in
grabbed
there, I
my
was like,
cycling shirt and ran out.
Yeah.
I just threw my bag. I didn't even know if it was the right place to put it.
I walked in there and it was like, well, there's some boobs. Okay, cool. Can I have some Gatorade, please? Because I'm dying. That was my biggest fear, because I figured going into that tent was going to get me disqualified, because that was going to be the moment that they would see, because you can't really hide the bulge. Thank goodness for race numbers do a really good job of covering that up.
I know somebody asked me once, how do you handle the anxiety? For me, it's just that anxiety before I dive into the water. Is somebody going to say something to me? Is somebody going to try to stop me from diving in the water? How do you manage that? Because it's got to take energy from you for completing the race. How do you manage that?
Actually, it's the activity itself that helps. So I get a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress at the beginning because I'm standing there in a wetsuit and I look 100% guy mode in a wetsuit, because at that time I didn't have a whole lot of breast growth or anything like that. So I just stood there looking like a guy with a pink cap on my head. But as soon as I hit that water and as soon as I hit the bike or as soon as I hit, I'm so like in the zone and so physically exhausted that I don't have time to be anxious. As soon as I entered that tent and nobody cared, then I was just like, oh, cool. Well, I was all worried about nothing. Okay.
Yeah.
Go on my way. So, it's the activity that helps manage the anxiety, because I'm just like so focused and so exhausted that I don't care.
So kind of to stay on that same thing with the barriers, and you guys brought up a lot of, different things as far as it comes to Ironman. And this is something that 2 years ago we discussed with USAT as they were creating new rules, in terms of like who was at the table when USAT sat down to say, these are the regulations for sport. And so this kind of ties into Khadijah and I we talk about, what it means to be the token and like kind of that fine balance between representation and tokenization. But I'm actually going to start with Aaron, because we were actually in the same room together with USAT when this came up. And, Aaron asked, okay, well, who do you have that you've been speaking to while you're writing these rules about trans athletes? I said Chris Mosier. And so it's kind of like, cool, but trans athletes are not a monolith. So, it's important to have other voices there. So if Aaron, you can kind of touch on that in terms of, sort of the flip side of tokenization, which is like kind of being excluded and there's only one person being the voice.
Yeah, it's always unfortunate that these sporting regulations are making policies for a group, but they don't have any representation of the group in the policy making process. It seems like the go-to person for anything trans related is Chris, and I love Chris. He's an amazing guy and very knowledgeable and a really good fighter for our cause, but he's a trans man, and trans men are treated dramatically different in sport compared to trans women. You can see any social media posts or news article about a trans athlete, a trans male athlete, like winning a race or accomplishing this tremendous feat in athletics, and all you have to do is just look at the comments and you'll see everybody praising them and telling how courageous they are and how inspiring they are for accomplishing such a great feat, and all this. But you take that same article and you replace that trans man with a trans woman, and you look down at those comments, all you'll see is like, it's just a girl with a dick. They're stealing places from actual women, unfair playing field, you know, you should die, you know, you don't deserve to be here, you should be racing with men, blah, blah, blah. I mean, like the same article, you can see the comic section and like, it's different, you know? So he, you know, Chris is obviously not going to have that experience. And also, you know, from like a transition standpoint and, you know, medication standpoint for, you know, HRT, hormone replacement therapy, is drastically different. You know, they take testosterone, we take, you know, progesterone and estrogen. And also we have to jump through a lot of hoops. You know, our testosterone level has to be in a lower than the average cis woman level to be able to compete, and be able to prove that, like, not even random, like every season, like, give us your blood work so we know what's going on. You know, at a point, some sporting regulations required trans women to have bottom surgery to be able to compete. Like the Olympics, that used to be their requirement to compete in the Olympics, is to go through bottom surgery. And then that trickled down. You know, a lot of the policies that are put in place is a lot of these sporting regulations look at what the Olympics are doing, and then they just copy that. So at a time they were doing horrible things, so everybody's did the horrible things, and then they started to change and wake up. But like even with Chris, when they're, you know, USAT or USA Cycling or Ironman are making these policies, he's not in the room helping them create these policies. They're writing the policies and they're just consulting his time, being like, hey, we've created everything. Here, read this, provide input. You know, he's not involved, or no trans woman is ever involved in the actual creating process of these policies to make sure that they're fair. It's always after the fact. And as you know, when people have something already written, even if it's in draft form, they're not going to change it. You know, Chris evaluated Ironman's trans policy and gave his input. I read through their draft of their policy and ripped it apart. And yet when they finally made it official, they made 0 changes. Wow. So like, nothing's going to change unless we're represented in the room that make the policy itself, not after the fact. And yeah, and Chris is not the only trans person in sports. He's definitely not the only trans pro athlete around. You know, obviously we don't have that trans pro athlete in triathlon, not yet at least, but there's plenty of trans women that are pro athletes and compete at a very high level, and they never get brought into anything. They never get consulted to. It's just Chris. And, you know, it's really frustrating because he only has one side of the story, one side of the coin, and doesn't really have the real world experience of the other side of the coin.
Yeah.
In 2012, one of my favorite races to compete in is the New York City Triathlon. I love that race. I've done it every year, except for the last 2 that they've canceled because of the heat and then because of COVID. But in 2012, they introduced the field for physically challenged athletes, and they actually had written in the ITU rules a classification for dwarfism. And so I was all excited that I was gonna for once be able to race as a physically challenged athlete in a category for people with dwarfism. So I find this rule and I look it up, and it says the maximum height for somebody with dwarfism to compete in that category is 4'2". The thing is, that's lower than the average height for somebody with my type of dwarfism. I was 2 inches too tall. So I literally was competing in a race with genetic dwarfism and was being told I was too tall to race as somebody with dwarfism. So they called me into the room in New York City for the classification team, and they said, okay, we have to measure your height. And I said, I already told you how tall I am. I'm 4'4". Okay, well, we have to make this official. So they measured me and they said, yes, you're too tall. And I said, I told you I was too tall. So they told me I couldn't race as a physically challenged athlete in a race where I was going to be the only one with dwarfism racing anyway. So I had to race as an age grouper. And they've since removed the category at all. So it's totally gone. They don't even have it as a classification anymore. So if I want to race as a physically challenged athlete, I have to race in the open category. So I'm not ever eligible for anything for prizes, and that's fine. Like I said, I'm never in it for the money. So that's, but I mean, to literally, I wasn't embarrassed because I was literally laughing at them as they were asking me to measure how tall I was in a hotel in New York City, just for, to put on. And so I said to them, where did you get your information? Who gave you that height of 4'2"? And they couldn't tell me. And I said, well, who is it? And I'm sure it's somebody who knows nothing just picked it as a random height. There's they couldn't have even looked it up anywhere because that's not a number that's anywhere. And the weirdest part is the legal height for being somebody with dwarfism is 4'10". So they were 8 inches off of the maximum height, telling me that I was too tall. So I think, what Aaron is talking about, it's that they're just not getting the people in the room that know the information. They're just kind of making up things as they go along, hoping that they're right.
Yeah. And, it also goes, because there's been a few people, a few cis women, that have been caught with higher levels of testosterone. And
what does cis mean? And you've used that term. I'm sorry. I'm ignorant.
No worries.
I'm asking because I need to know too.
It means that you were biologically a woman.
Oh,
you were born female.
Okay.
So I don't know. I can't remember what the SIS stands for, but that's kind of how you identify someone who's biologically female.
Okay.
So there's been instances in sports where cis women have, been tested or been caught with higher levels of testosterone and been proven that they're naturally producing higher levels of testosterone. But then, these sporting regulations are saying, well, you need to take a testosterone blocker to bring you into the average levels that are required for a woman to compete. And wow, a lot of people got pissed off about that. Like they were saying that they shouldn't have to test or reduce their levels of testosterone because they naturally produce a higher level than your average woman. And that kind of opens up the can of worms of, okay, if this person doesn't have to do it, then why do we have to do it? Because we naturally produce testosterone at a higher level than your average competitor in that race. So it starts these gray areas of requirements of okay, cisgendered women don't have to follow these rules, but we do. And that's not me saying that we should be able to compete without blocking any level of testosterone. We definitely need to reduce our level of testosterone that is required, but everybody should have to adhere to that rule, regardless if you naturally produce it or not. It's quickly becoming these issues are coming up on both sides of the fence that are starting to challenge these rules, and nobody really knows what to do because they're not talking to trans people and they're not talking to women, so it's just a bunch of guys making rules for things that they don't understand. So it's just a mess.
because it kind of dives into a bigger conversation of, certain people biologically have certain advantages, whether it's, Michael Phelps, who has an abnormally high threshold for lactic acid, and also he's just was basically built like a fish. So, his body has
his arms are too long.
Right. I mean, he was born outside of what would be considered the norm, and has advantages physically that allows him to, be the tremendous athlete that he is. And those things are allowed. And so, it's an interesting conversation of where we draw that line of, this is an acceptable, biological advantage, but this isn't.
Right.
And typically those policies tend to affect women far more than men. And specifically, especially when we talk about the higher testosterone levels, that was Caster Semenya and some other athletes, which were women of color. So, it's, even when those things are enforced, it's typically very specific to what groups of people those things are, enforced on, which is a lot of times, or most of the time, going to be trans women or women of color.
Yeah. And, I don't want what my comments to come off as that I was against her or them because of their increased levels of testosterone. No, I think what happened to them was inappropriate, unfair, untreated. It's just more of how they handled the rules, and this overwhelming of they shouldn't have to do that. That kind of just okay, what makes them special and us not type of situation. So I'm still pro that person. It's just more of the situation.
Yeah. So we have a few minutes left before we'll open it up to question and answer. So I just kind of have one final closing thing for each of you guys, to just kind of if there's a main takeaway that you'd like for people to be mindful of how they themselves can use their privilege in order to help other communities, whether it's in triathlon or kind of everyday life. So what is something, whether it's small or large actionable items that they can kind of do to make sport more inclusive? Or, if you don't have anything, maybe what you hope people take away and can be inspired by with you as an athlete. So we'll start with Khadijah.
One of the things I always say is that we're more the same than different. To be inclusive, I think, is just to welcome that person where they are. Love me for the good things about me. Let me know about the things I'm a jerk about, just like you would anybody else. And know that I'm an athlete just like anybody else. One of the things that I hated when I first started racing, and I think it's the thing that made me more competitive. I have a really competitive side anyway, but I noticed that people saw me as, oh, it's so nice, the little Muslim girls come in a race. Oh no, I'm coming here to win. How you like that? See me as an athlete just like anybody else. It could chastise me for the things that are bad about me and love me for the things that are good about me. And I think that's the one takeaway that I have. See me as a human being first. This is the skin that we're in. It's just the packaging. We all have a soul.
Yeah. Erin, do you have any kind of final takeaways or things that you'd like people to do or take into their everyday life?
Yeah, I mean, who we are, and how we want to live our life isn't affecting your world. We're just wanting, the same basic rights that everybody else gets and gets to enjoy. We're not becoming trans women to steal podiums away from you. We're not becoming trans women to steal prize money from you or gold medals or anything. We're not making this decision, and we're not making this life-changing decision and we're doing this to become who we are on the inside. We're doing this to match our outside appearance with who we are on the inside, that's what we're doing. We just want to live our life. And, we're not doing this to get a competitive advantage. Like, I mean, after transitioning and, 5 years into transitioning on hormones, I'm just, I actually lost competitiveness. I don't ride my bike as fast as I used to before transitioning. We're not here to steal things. And, we can hear your whispers, we can hear what you're saying under your breath. We can see your looks, you're not hiding, you're not hiding anything. We can see it and it's affecting us. And, we treat it as personally being attacked. If you see a trans woman in the locker room, who cares? Just let them do their thing. They're not in there to catch a look, at some naked women. No, we just want to get our business done. There's plenty of other cis women that are checking out other cis women in the locker room regardless. I mean, like, we've all seen penises, we've all seen vaginas. If you see a trans woman in there, let them, just leave them alone. Who cares? And if you see someone getting, attacked or, verbally assaulted or any type of assault, either in the locker room, at a race, in social media, you see this onslaught of hate, help them, give them support. Don't just sit there and look and not do anything. Stand up and help them, because nobody should have to deal with that. And,
I think even before that, before it even gets to that point, which is something that was one of the takeaways I had when I was reading through one of your blog posts, that is something super simple and I had never thought of. So I'm definitely guilty of this, of like not thinking outside myself, but it's even, going to your gym and asking what their policies are in terms of trans members, ask them what would happen, so that you can be somebody speaking up and using your voice for somebody else, which is like such an easy thing to do. And yet we don't think to do it. So I could
definitely throw some links into chat that provides resources and stuff about like various laws, state laws with regards to like restrooms, locker rooms and stuff like that. But thank you for reminding me, because I don't remember any of those blog posts that I write. But take the initiative and go to your gym and ask them, hey, do you have a policy for this? And it doesn't matter if you're not trans or don't know anybody who's trans, but maybe somebody in that gym is, and they might need help, or they're too afraid to ask the gym. I go into the gym and I always ask them what their trans policy is, because I don't want to deal with nonsense. Go into your gym, ask them what it is. If they do, then go on social media and say, this gym is a safe place for the trans community. I highly recommend it, because they need to know where to go. Allows them to feel safe. If the gym doesn't have a policy, then, help them. I'll provide links that everybody that is here today that can go and learn and pass on the information as well.
Awesome. And then John, do you have any kind of final closing thoughts, takeaways?
The one thing that I want to kind of mention that we didn't really get a chance to touch on, and that was the idea of inspiration. And I really think that like inspiration is a two-sided coin, in the fact that like when I got into this racing, I was doing it totally for me. And what I felt at the beginning were a lot of total strangers saying things to me like, oh, wow, you're awesome, you're amazing. And I really want to warn people to be careful with those kind of statements when you don't know the person, because they can really come across as being really shallow praise, because all you're doing is judging that person on their body, on their outside shell. and you're looking at maybe me with, 4'4", 160 pounds, thinking, what the hell are you doing running a marathon? Like, that's like nobody like you should do it. So I'm going to say, way to go. But if you know my story and you know a little bit more about me, what got me here, the fact that I'm, a father, a teacher, over 50 years old, not very healthy a few years ago, and I've kind of changed my life. That's the important part that I want you to know about. Don't just look at my body and say, because of that body, what you're doing is amazing. But the other side of the coin is I get emails and messages from either other people with dwarfism that are adults or from parents of young children with dwarfism. And those kinds of things I can't get enough of because, like I said, when I was their age, I had nobody. There was nobody with any kind of, physical idea about doing any kind of racing or swimming or cycling or anything that had dwarfism. And so I didn't have anyone to aspire to. So I was the football manager. I was the, cheer crew. I was all that kind of stuff. And it wasn't until I became a much older adult that I got into this. And so when I get letters from people like that inspired me to kind of keep doing what I'm doing. So that part of it I think is great. But if you see somebody that looks a little different from you, they might be an amputee, they might be visually impaired, they might have a traumatic brain injury, whatever. Don't just, like, the first thing out of your mouth shouldn't be, you're awesome, you're amazing. Get to know them first before you start doing that kind of praise, because I think that story, they want to maybe share that with you. And when you get to know a little bit more about them, I think that's kind of where you go from.
Awesome. Thank you so
much.
much.
The skin we're in.
I also want to say, because this usually happens a lot with these types of panels, from the last summit that we were at with regards to asking questions about trans related topics. Don't be afraid to ask any question. I don't get offended very easily.
I have asked a lot.
Yeah, it's like, I know there's a lot of questions regarding that, and people are just sometimes afraid to ask because they don't want to come off as insensitive or, possibly hateful or anything like that. But, don't worry about that. Ask the questions that you want to ask, because knowledge is power, and and learning is important. So I wanted to get that up front because of the last one, the last panel that I was a part of, that was strictly nothing but trans topics. There were like no questions. And I'm like, I know there's questions out there. You're just afraid to ask. So don't worry about, hurting my feelings or anything.
I learned a lot just listening to you talk. I've never, the topic has just never come up with me. But other than the Castor Semenya issue, I know it happens, but the indignities. And then John have to get measured, really? And I think listening to other people's stories, it makes the issues that I've had, seem small.
They're all equal size.
Yeah, they're different. It gives you perspective. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I just applaud both of you.
But ask anything.
Yeah, and I have to admit, I'm completely ignorant. So just listening to the issues and things like that it's eye-opening. Definitely eye-opening.
Gina, I don't know if we have any questions. I haven't been keeping up with the chat. Do you want to ask a few questions from the chat, Gina, if you're here?
Yes, I am here, and I have you covered. Actually, the first question's for you, Natali. This is from Sarah. She said, Natali, you touched base on finding clothes to fit. Do you have other experiences in the fitness world that are based negatively on your side? Just curious. I'm a plus size blogger.
Yeah, so definitely triathlon clothing does not follow sizing of regular everyday clothing. So what would be like, average clothing, if you're like most of my shirts, for instance, are either like large or extra large. In triathlon, if I can fit into it, it's a 2X. And that's typically the largest size that companies go up to. So if you're larger than a triathlon 2X, which is like a normal person, large or extra large, good luck finding kits that fit, because it can, I mean, now there's companies that are starting to be more size inclusive and make things, but it definitely, I mean, finding a wetsuit was awful. You know, I had to get a shorty wetsuit that only goes to like the elbow and knee, because the full length one, you know, in order to fit my body, was super long in the arms and legs and wasn't very accommodating. So I've definitely had a lot of issues, because triathlon clothing is based on professional triathletes, and it's based on basically like a size extra small. And then they're like, cool, we'll add 2 inches to that for each next size. And by the time you get to a 2X, it's really just an extra small that's slightly larger, rather than taking into account that a larger athlete is going to have different proportions to their body and need that kit to fit differently. Like, they're not thinking, like, I guess they just decided that fat people couldn't do sports, and so we didn't deserve to have clothing that fit well. So it's definitely an ongoing struggle in terms of just like being able to have the proper gear to wear to get out there.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be real. Women of color are shaped different. I'm Black and Caribbean, and I'm all shoulders, rear end, and quads. My waist is this big, and my shoulders are big, and I have a big butt. So a lot of the kits, I'll have a wetsuit, it's tight on my butt and my quads. I can barely get it over my quads, and then I have all this extra right here, and it's aggravating sometimes trying to get clothes that actually fit. We're not all built the same.
Yeah, I even had struggles trying to find kits that fit, and I'm like the prime example of their shrink, pink it and shrink it. But I don't wear men's clothing. I don't wear men's kits or anything like that. And at that time, I still had male genitalia, so trying to find shorts that, because obviously female tri shorts are not designed for male genitalia to be there. So being able to find something that fit was really difficult. It was really hard, because obviously they're not designed for it. So, I definitely ran into those issues also, of trying to be able to find anything to kind of like work with things down there and but also keeping things, in place, when I'm running or something like that, so they're not just like juggling around.
Okay, this next question is for everybody. John, you already answered it, but I love your answer, and I think you'll probably want to answer it again aloud. Why not? Mentally, how have you felt on your hardest days, and how have you felt on your best days? That question came from Aaron Herndon.
Yeah, I think I wrote an answer down, and basically, when you're on your best days, it's just kind of like, I feel like I could just run forever, or I feel like I could just get on that bike and I hit all the numbers that the coach says. If I'm on Zwift cycling away, I'm hitting all my power numbers and everything's terrific, and I get all the little check marks and all little stars. And unfortunately, I'm very competitive with myself. I'm not as competitive with others, though my wife and son will probably disagree when it comes to games of Uno and other stuff. But on, when I'm competing like that, because I learned a long time ago that when I'm in a race, I'm not going to be able to race with most average size people. So I kind of get them out of my mind. So I kind of, I feel great and I hit the numbers, but I think, what I wrote in the answer, and I think this is really important, is even when I'm in my worst day and I don't want to do anything in terms of physical activity, there has never been a day when I felt really crummy that I've done a workout and then not felt better. Like, I've always felt better, no matter how, like I said, I want to roll over and go back to sleep, or I want to have another cup of coffee, whatever. Let's get out the door. Let's do it. And when I get back home, I always feel better. And so if you're feeling pretty low, I can't think of a better thing to do than to get moving.
I definitely, for me, like, if I'm having a really good day, I am unstoppable. In real life, I might not be, but in my mind, like, I am Godzilla crushing the streets and nobody can stop me. And then on my worst days, I like I call it personal PRs. And so for me, sometimes it's like, okay, today out on my run, I got to pet 11 dogs and that was a PR for me. Or just like silly, goofy things that kind of, get my mind off of being in the pain cave or having too much on my mind, just giving myself that distraction of, hey, like this weird thing happened with a goose and on the trail or whatever the case may be, just kind of find those moments that kind of like make you laugh and you're like, okay, wasn't that bad. Glad I got this done. Like it's over. I can put it behind me now and kind of look forward to the next thing.
For me, obviously when everything's going good, it's just like, oh, okay. When obviously, a lot of times when things are going good, you're not really thinking about it. You're just like, all right, that was another training day, right? You don't like, at least for me, it's like, well, I feel super accomplished because I had a good workout. I'm just like, I had a workout. Obviously during the challenging times and the hard times with training, I found that I kind of put my piece of inspirational text on, those little velo stickers that I put on the top bar on my bike. That, whenever things are getting hard and getting tough and I just feel like I want to quit, I have my little motto that I live my life by, and that I stole from Ironman to make it good. I have anything is possible on my bike's top bar. So whenever anything is hard or I want to quit, I just look down and I see that. But also, I have it tattooed on my forearm as well, which might be hard to see on camera, as a constant reminder, because when I'm in my aero bars, that tattoo is pretty much right in my face. So I don't have to like fully look down at my top bar on my bike to see, I'm already tucked in. So anything is possible is like right in my face throughout everything that's not the swim. And that helps give me some motivation to keep going. So that's what I do. I put encouraging words all over me permanently.
And I know for me, I guess more so as it relates to races, I always try to race in honor of other people. And that always feels uplifting. I know my best races, I get out of the water feeling fresh. Everybody knows I love to bike, and I even talk trash when I'm on the bike. I point at people, and then just getting off the bike, knowing I had a good time and I'm ready to run. And those are the best days. The last time I raced which was in Triathlon Havana. It felt like that. It was amazing. I was racing in honor of a friend, Don Davis Calhoun, and I literally felt like I had wings. I had trained really hard and I raced well. At my age, I had a personal best. Some of my friends and family in Cuba were there, and they were cheering me on, and I felt like I had wings. I felt like total crap when I stopped, but during the race, I felt great. I know.
But you did. You had Dawn's wings.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did, girl. And I think my worst experience, and the crazy thing is my worst experience, I crossed the line feeling like a superhero. I had overtrained that year. This was the year that I went to South Africa. It was a race I didn't expect. I had raced far too much. And by the time I got to Ironman Arizona, I probably shouldn't have done that race. When I got off the bike, I had no idea how I was going to finish the marathon. And I just started running. And I was cramping, I was vomiting. And I remember Tom Shear, he's the kilt guy I was telling you about. I said, Tom, I don't think I can make it. And he looked at his watch and he said, oh no, even if you walk, you have plenty of time. And he calls himself the 16:59 pace group. And mind you, I'm vomiting, can barely walk. And I'm arguing this with this man. I am not the 16:59 pace group. But I finished. I have no idea how I finished the second half of that marathon. But when I crossed the line, I felt like a superhero. And some of my friends from F2C Nutrition were part of the support group when you cross the line. One of my teammates came up to me and said, "No, I have her. She's my teammate." And I just felt they knew I was having a horrible day, but knowing that I had so many friends who were there for me to uplift me on my worst day, as far as racing is concerned. I've had personal bad days, but as far as racing is concerned, I felt like a superhero. I literally felt like a superhero because I had so much love. So I mean, I think it can go both ways. Yeah.
Oh man, I feel like I could feed you all questions forever. Natalie, in the name of time, is there anything you want to say to shut this down before we check out?
I just want to thank you guys. I know you were probably like, what are you talking about? What do you want me to be on a panel? And it was really important for me to have people that kind of had a personal connection with. I didn't want to have this conversation with people who are experts or sharing data or any of that. Like, I wanted it to be really personal. And I thank you guys so much for being vulnerable and sharing parts of yourself and being part of this conversation that I hope was really valuable to everybody listening. I know I really enjoyed this conversation and being able to share these stories, and hopefully people can gain some inspiration from it, not just in sport, but even their everyday life and how they can go forward and make a change. So thank you guys, like from the bottom of my heart. I appreciate you so much. And I'm so thankful for you guys for being here. It really means the world to me.
Thank you.
Oh boy. So as we take the next minute, take 1 minute and just check out. What are you leaving with tonight? What are you taking into your life from this panel? It could be energy. It could be new knowledge. It could be something great. And then we'll shut it down.
I know for me, it's new knowledge. I've never met Aaron or John, and I learned so much today just being a part of this. And Natalie knows I will never say no to her. So thank you for having me.
Incredible friends. Natalie, thank you for putting together a panel that will be hard to top. We are so grateful at A Sweat Life for your partnership and for everyone's agreement to do this today. This has been another very special episode of We Got Goals and a sweatlife.com production. Thanks to Ryan Barayuga for the video production, to Ryan Deffett for the sound production, to today's guest, Natali Villarruel, and to all of the panelists from Sweatworking Summit.